Hey everybody. Oh, it's a house of mirrors out there. Really, really interesting time to be alive. I feel like we keep discovering the layers beneath the layers, beneath the layers, beneath the layers of distortion, of manipulation, and our perception really has to get sharp. Our discernment really, really has to get sharp. And I want to talk about something that's been happening in the disclosure and awakening community that and this is not to create any kind of drama. This is not to take sides with anybody. It's because what's playing out is actually a perfect and very instructive example of exactly what we've been discussing in this series. Mind control, manipulation, infiltration, how insidious it is, how subtle and sophisticated you've got to get at this game to see what's actually going on, and what happens when someone with genuine sight calls out what they see. So if you've been following the conversation around disclosure, which, I mean, if you listen to me, I imagine that you have been following it. We've got cascades of disclosure happening at different levels, and we could say official disclosure, right? For the rest of us who've not been waiting for official disclosure, we've been in this movement for some time, and going down our own rabbit holes and using our own discernment and listening to many, many different voices over time and checking that against our intuitive sense of truth. Okay. And that is definitely a process. But there is also something happening that we could call quote unquote official disclosure, where files are actually being released, albeit, a trickle of files. And that disclosure, that official disclosure, is a tightly controlled, underpinned by multiple agendas. And so, the Epstein files, the UAP hearings, and I hate even using the term UAP because it's just part of the PSYOP, the MK Ultra hearings that were supposed to happen that were scuttled at the last minute, and all of the drama around, Pam Bondi's office being descended upon and all the files taken away, and now this film, the Disclosure Day film, getting mainstream attention. All of this is, fits together perfectly, of course. And you may have noticed that things are accelerating. And when things accelerate, so does the chaos, the confusion, the interference, right? So it's like muddy the waters, keep people confused, right? And keep people divided, right? That's what they love to do. That's just the playbook, right? So a friend of mine who is a genuinely gifted psychic with a substantial following and a track record of integrity, recently spoke out about something that she was shown spontaneously in her inner vision. She wasn't looking for it. She didn't go after anyone on purpose. She was shown something in her direct perception, which she understood to be etheric, gray implantation in a well-known intuitive who's being introduced to the mainstream awakening audiences through large platforms. Okay, so that means access to millions of people. And she felt that being shown this was not accidental, and that when you're given a perception, that you have a responsibility to share it. And so she did. And what happened next was very instructive. She got a lot of pushback, okay, not to say attack, maybe some level of attack also, not by strangers necessarily, but from within the disclosure community itself. And I want to pause on that because, within the disclosure community is where I feel like we need to be supporting one another in in zeroing in on truth with as much discernment as possible, and having the maturity to suspend our reactivity and genuinely feel into things. All right, so there's this pattern of speaking truth, pointing something out, and being attacked by people who should be, or handled by people who should be your allies in the absolute pursuit of truth. And it's one of the oldest signs in the book, isn't it? When you're over the target, you take fire. And I'm not saying that everyone who came after her is consciously working against disclosure. In fact, that's what she was accused of by some people. Most of them probably are not. And that's exactly the point that I want to make today, because I'm not here to talk about that issue. I'm here to talk about the pattern behind it and what it has been revealing to me about my own level of discernment and paying attention and trusting my own intuition and what my heart says and what my energy field says about things. Oh, because I'm still learning to trust that, right? And so, all right. So then there's also this film, Disclosure Day, which is out now, and even the mainstream audiences are aware of it, and the fact that it's coming out now is no accident, of course. And and I haven't seen it, and I'm actually not planning to go see it. And some people who know me were like astonished by that and thinking, I would have thought you would be first in line to see this movie. And I'm like, no, I have not. I don't feel a pull to go see it, and I feel like I would only be frustrated because I know that it is, just a tiny sliver of a story, and, there's distortion there. And I had a feeling of hesitation about, I'm not sure that that it's smart to go and see that film for other reasons, which I couldn't articulate. But since then, I've heard from multiple credible sources, including my friend, who observed that what the film is actually doing energetically and narratively. Okay, so first of all, the gray alien race is the only one featured, and of course that there are thousands, millions of different species, and so we're only focusing on this one. And the framing, from everything I hear, is about creates sympathy. And may be designed to normalize a hybridization and appeal to the innocence of people who don't yet have the background, the education, the sophistication, or the interdimensional perception to understand the full history of how these particular beings, this faction of gray aliens, because there are many kinds of gray aliens too, right? Not just one kind, but how this faction have operated with regard to humanity, or to be able to realize what may be happening to them on a subtle level as they are watching the film. Okay, guys, that subliminal programming has been part of television for decades and decades, probably since television came out. Right, and that they've been looking for ways to implant subliminal messaging in entertainment, right? Well, it goes deeper than that. It's much more sophisticated than that now. It's not just, flashing an image on the screen that you don't see, but that your subconscious mind registers. There are subtle things that happen on energetic and etheric levels that most people have no idea of. And if you start talking about them, people will look at you as if you have three heads, okay? But all you have to do is explore the work of Sabrina Wallace, to see that what is happening is way beyond. I won't go into that right now, and I'm not going to go into the geopolitical layers of deep state agendas and predictive programming today. We've covered, some of that in previous sessions, but what I want to name is the pattern, right? Controlled disclosure, partial truth with a definite slant, emotional and etheric manipulation toward a predetermined destination. Where do they want me to go? What do they want me to think? How do they want me to feel? These are the questions that we should be asking ourselves when we're exposed to any media, including alternative, including any kind of media that you're exposed to, okay? This is not new. This is the oldest tool in the book. All of this stuff, it's the same playbook over and over and over again. And for people who are just waking up, just beginning to open to the reality of ET presence and everything that that implies, this film may be their first major impression. That's what concerns me. And I think it should concern all of us who care about genuine disclosure and, you know, the fact that it has a lot more, you know, it's not just about ETs, and I've said that over and over and over again. Anyway, here's what I really want to talk about today, because all of this, my friend's experience, the film, the pushback that she got about making her very honest observation, the agenda is a window into something much larger, which I also often talk about, and that is mind control. And we can't talk about it enough. We cannot talk about it enough, because it is not conspiracy theory. And I think many people are coming around to that, you know, that realizing that it's not just some wacko conspiracy theory, that it's a real thing. You know, and if you haven't noticed that your phone brings things to you that, you know, you've thought about in your mind or talked about with other people, and suddenly you're seeing ads for it, and suddenly it's on your Instagram feed or whatever, you know, you've got to realize that there's weird good things going on out there, right? And you know, mind control is also not something that has only happened to documented victims of MK Ultra programs, you know, though their testimony is absolutely real and documented and harrowing. And I personally know people now who have lived through that, and I absolutely honor these amazing survivors. They're some of the most amazing beings on the whole planet. And they are also trying to communicate the fact that mind control is a planetary phenomenon. All right. And we need to be honest about the spectrum here. You got, on one end, you have the documented, programmatic, trauma-based programming, MK Ultra, Project Monarch, and all of the sub-projects of MK Ultra, the use of dissociation and trauma and frequencies, you know, tech, to create compartmentalized altars for all different purposes. The testimony of Kathy O'Brien has documented this extensively, and if you haven't read it, you should read it. And she's not alone. Many others have documented and gone on record with this too. You know, it is real. It is on the record. So we've got that end of the spectrum, the people who bore some of the most torturous things you could ever possibly imagine, and some things you probably can't imagine, because mind control was being studied and developed, and that was for deployment on the entire population, not just a few people. On the other hand, you know, or the other end, let's say, you have subtle ambient entrainment, the kind of thing that we are subject to every single day, the news cycle, the content shaping through the algorithm, educational and religious programming and frameworks that redirect your sovereignty outward. They redirect your energy outward. They bring your attention outward, right? Not on yourself, because if you spent enough time checking in with yourself, you would discover that everything is within. And so, you know, the priority is to keep you from doing that. And we've talked about that. And then there's this middle layer that most people don't really have a framework for yet. And I include myself in that. I am really doing my best to get a handle on it and feel into it, because I can feel the edges of it around me now, and I'm becoming more aware of how exotic technology and psionic warfare are operating, you know, in and around all of this invisibly. I got a got an EMF monitor recently. It's a simple little tool that you can turn on and go around and point it at different things, and it'll give you a reading on how much EMF is being emitted by different things. And it's very illuminating and sometimes a little freaky because, an innocent little, heater of essential oil resins that has been plugged in and sitting, by my table for ages. When I approached the monitor to it, it was like, beep, 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 beep. Like, danger, danger, danger. I was like, oh, I unplugged it. I'm like, oh my God, I've been, near that thing. You just don't see, right? You don't necessarily sense what is going on and where the red zones are, the danger zones are in everyday life, right? Dream warfare, timeline manipulation, etheric implantation, the weaponization of psychic abilities, remote influence programs. These are not science fiction. They are not science fiction. Definitively not science fiction. And you can go on and you can look at the patents that have been created for absolutely diabolical ways of influencing and controlling and attacking the general population. They are really the classified operational reality of intelligence agencies and military programs that have had access to technology that most people believe doesn't exist, right? They don't imagine that that is already on the planet, right? And this is technology that in most cases was acquired through decades of back-engineered ET craft and direct treaties with non-human intelligences. Okay, so what the average person dismisses this because they have no reference point for it, which is understandable, but the reference point exists, the programs exist, the technology exists, it all exists. And it filters down, not always through, dramatic, targeted programming, although certainly in the cases of some people, who now have a name, there's a group, and it's called targeted individuals, and I've known some of these people too. But through the field itself, through the media, through the implanted networks of influence and handlers and through contactees and abductees who have been used as unwitting vectors for, misinformation or influence since childhood and may not have the awareness of it. And this is where, we need to be so careful. And that's where compassion comes in, right? Because people may be delivering a message that they absolutely believe to be true. And they may be being influenced without awareness of that. I mean, this is a house of mirrors. It is vast. It is subtle. And, and its first line of defense is that it sounds completely bonkers. And again, I want to refer you to the work of Sabrina Wallace. She's an amazing, amazing individual. And if you just, look up her name, you can find her various channels where she exposes all of this stuff. She shows it to you. She's brilliant. And, it's hard for me personally, hard to watch a lot of it all at once because it's like, okay. But I always keep a positive perspective on this kind of thing because we've got to be able to see what's going on, and more and more people need to see what's going on so that we can say no. We have to say no. If you don't say no, then it is presumed that you agree, that you are okay with it, that you consent to it. All right. And that's why I want to name this pattern too, and how to recognize it, because practical discernment markers are very helpful and keep us grounded in the middle of all of this chaos and, discovering that our reality is a lot more like the Matrix than anybody ever realized. That the Matrix is practically a documentary. So how do we navigate this? How do we begin to develop the perceptual literacy to recognize distortion and manipulation when we see it, or when we don't see it? How do we feel for it? How do we sense it? Okay, So a few markers that I keep coming back to try to help myself. Well, number one, watch what happens when somebody speaks the truth. Not just what they say, but what happens after, right? Do they get attacked? Is there a furor of like, blah, 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 bots and stuff going after them? Or, are the attacks disproportionate to the claim? Do the attacks come from within the community that should have the most discernment? That pattern is a tell for me. I always pay attention now when I see that going on. Also noticing when everybody seems to be saying the same thing all at once, like follow the bouncing ball, right? And you hear the same phrases. This happens a lot more on the mainstream media, but it can happen in the alternative media too. Like all of a sudden there's a certain phrase that's being spoken over and over again. That's a form of entrainment. They want you to, you should ask yourself, like, what are they trying to get me to think here? What do they want me to think? What do they want me to feel? Right? Another thing that I try to look for is noticing noticing the agenda is in what is omitted. Okay? What isn't spoken of. Sometimes just out of ignorance, right? But sometimes deliberately omitted, right? A disclosure film that mentions only one alien race. That's not a neutral document, Partial truth is one of the most sophisticated tools of manipulation, right? Because the part of you that recognizes truth is like, yeah, well, that feels true. And then we feel like we have to take all of it, the whole package with it. No, we don't. We don't have to do that. This partial truth feels like can feel like a revelation. It can create a feeling of being like let in to the secret that you didn't know before. And then meanwhile, it's guiding you exactly where it wants you to go. Even more important, what I'm trying to develop in myself and what I really think we all need to work on collectively is feeling and sensing, right? Feeling for the energetic signature. And that's why recently I did one of these we need to talks about our spiritual gifts, because a lot of times we totally have the ability to sense these things. We all have these spiritual gifts, but sometimes we don't actually recognize them when they're happening. Like I didn't recognize that the feeling that I have been having about that movie, which was a feeling of not gonna go watch that. I'm gonna stay away from that. It's not an intellectual decision that I'm making based on. It's not based on facts or anything like that. It's been literally a feeling like stay away. Like there's a boundary, like two magnets with the positive side that push each other away, right? I have felt a repulsion, right? So we need to feel for the energetic signature of things and people. Sometimes we get, hypnotized by the words when we're hearing somebody speak. And the mind gets hooked on the words, right? Somebody can be speaking something that, that is reassuring, for example, but underneath that you get a feeling of, I don't trust this person one bit, and we need to pay more attention to that because our body knows the difference between information that is expanding our sovereignty and information that is subtly redirecting it elsewhere, or our power, right? Because one feeling opens you up and makes you feel like you are in your power, and the other one moves you toward a conclusion that is more of a mental conclusion that was already prepared for you. Or it appeals to unresolved emotion, wounding in us that the place from which we can be reactive and follow along with something from a place of reactivity, not a place of discernment and sovereign knowing, heart knowing. And then finally, and this is what I've been thinking about, since this kind of fury around what my friend said, is, being able to discern between programs and people, between the person and the programming, right? Many people who serve as vectors for distorted information or for agendas are not conscious of that. They are not conscious of it, right? They sometimes are abductees or contactees, people with genuine gifts who have been interfered with at deep levels, and sometimes for a very, very, very long time, sometimes since childhood, And so that's something we need to see too, right? Because we have all been interfered with for a very, very, very long time. We're really all in the same boat here. And compassion for a person does not require accepting the distortion that they may be carrying, right? And I think that can help us to be more discerning, to take a step back, to not be reactive, and to not feel like, we need to try to control the situation. So, there's a tendency in spiritual communities to feel that calling out distortion is somehow unloving, like, the higher path is to hold space for everyone's truth. Well, I disagree with that. I mean, I think that confusion is itself part of the programming. My friend did not speak out to harm anyone. She spoke out because she was shown something, and she understood that the people who would encounter this individual through the mainstream platforms deserve to have that information. That's not attack. That is an act of genuine care. That's an act of genuine care. When you see distortion and you see it clearly, okay, and let me qualify this, right? The New Age programming that says, don't call it out, just hold space, just hold love. I want to examine that. Discernment is not judgment. It's not judging somebody. Naming a distortion is not the same thing as condemning the person who's carrying it. And this is as long as, and this is really important, you have done your inner work. As long as you have done your inner work, you are speaking from clarity, not reactivity. You're naming what you see. You're not naming what you fear, right? And that's a big if, right? Because, I have seen Satyavrati, great spiritual teacher with great discernment, call something out that needed to be called out. It was hard to hear, but it came from a place of clarity, not from any kind of agenda or projection, right? Those are the cuts that go deepest, and I remember he called that the sword of love, the sword of truth. It cuts with love, right? It goes right to the quick, right to the heart of something, but it cuts with love, right? The purpose, the motivation is love. It comes from a place of clarity. And in a time of accelerating disclosure where people are waking up rapidly and are genuinely vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation, being willing to name what you see is one of the most loving things that you can do, again, provided that it comes from a place of clarity in you and you have done your inner work. You are healing, right? You don't have an agenda. You are not there to attack somebody personally, right? There is a kind of righteousness and a truth that speaks through people when they are aligned. And that's the kind of truth-telling that I'm talking about here. So, there's something about all of this that genuinely excites me. Because even though, sometimes I get overwhelmed when I'm like, oh my gosh, so many layers of manipulation. It's just like, I keep calling it a house of mirrors. It's just like everywhere you look, it's wobbly distortions and you're trying to find your way through it, but every layer of this, or every weird wobbly mirror, is an invitation, because the only reason that mind control works, the only reason that etheric implantation works, the only reason that infiltration in the disclosure community can happen, is because we haven't yet fully occupied our sovereign field. And we're all learning to do that, We're all learning to do that. The more whole we become, the less there is to hook into. That's just how it works, right? I mean, even if the stuff that is unexamined still, the stuff, the shame, the things that I told a story a while back about, something that was in my field that was hooked into a place that I hadn't, I just hadn't named it. I hadn't fully named it. And it was like a place of shame. And that's where they get in, the distortions hook into those places in us that are unhealed. So naturally, the more healed and therefore whole we become, the less there is to hook into. That stuff just kind of, it can't stick to you anymore. And you can see it coming a mile away. The more we develop genuine heart coherence, not as a spiritual concept, but as a lived, embodied state that we keep returning to over and over when things get super crazy out there. Don't think that your mind can figure it out. Your mind cannot figure it out. Your mind can be duped. But this knower in here, your knower knows, right? It cannot be duped. That is where our clear perception comes from. And the more clearly we perceive from here, the less we can be steered. And the less we can be, activated by fear narratives, and, they just can't get a rise out of you anymore, right? So this is not about becoming paranoid. Even though sometimes, I swear, it feels like I'm looking everywhere. I'm like looking under everything. I think it's just a natural stage that we have to go through. But it's not about being paranoid. It is about being clear, right? And this is the looking at absolutely everything, the testing it against your heart field and your knower, is a kind of spiritual rigor and daily hygiene that has become necessary, and until we're through this crazy thing. The exotic technology that I was describing, dream warfare and remote influence and etheric interference and all of that stuff, is real, and it's designed to exploit this gap between who we are right now and who we know ourselves to be here, who we really are, right? It can put a lot of doubt in you. It can really throw a wrench into the works. But as that gap is closing through our healing practices, through our sovereignty practices, through, doing your inner work, metabolizing, alchemizing the shadow, all of that stuff, as that is happening, our connection to source is clearer to us, right? Even though it's already there, we have so much doubt about that. We have so much bad programming, that tells us we're not worthy, and, that teaches us not to trust our connection and all of that. So, the inner work that we do kind of clears that distortion away, and we start to trust ourselves, trust our connection, right? And then those tools of interference really lose their purchase with our field, right? And we also need to consciously declare sometimes, right? And consciously declare non-consent with these agendas that are all around us. We need to clarify our own position in the field. We are not helpless in the face of all of this. We never were. We just didn't see the game that was being played. Now we're all starting to realize that we've been in a game, and that we were being played. But we don't have to be, right? We don't have to be those pawns on the board anymore. We were just asleep. And that is changing. Boy, is that ever changing. I think if you realized who you really are, you would just be blown away. Yeah, we all came back at this time for a reason. All right. So let's give ourselves a break. Let's, not punish each other for really doing our best to see truth, to speak truth, to call out distortion and manipulation when we see it. Because, divide and conquer only works if you believe that there are, I'm for the humans. I am for humans. Right? And I feel like we humans all need to pull together and realize that that our planet's been occupied, and that the world that we were born into and that we grew up inside was not designed for us. It was, it was not designed to benefit us. It was designed to keep us controlled and exploitable and extractable. So we humans need to pull together, and we need to name that influence, name that distortion, name that infiltration in all of the different forms that it takes, and refuse to be exploited by it, right? This is what sovereignty really is. No, we are human beings. This is our planet. This is where we live, and we don't have to live in the systems that were designed to keep us enslaved. That's over now. Right? So, banding together as humans, yes, and we come from many different places, and we come from, genetically, we come from many different star systems, but we're all here as humans for a very definite purpose now, right? So this is what I see, is like at the deepest layer, well, the deepest one I can see right now anyway, the deepest layer of the distortion is this complete amnesia about our history and what's happened to us on this planet and who has been in charge, and and they may have human form, some of them, but there's something else going on there. So we need to be aware of this now, and we need to start pulling together as human beings, team human. So I'm going to leave you with this today. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your interest in this subject, which I think is of vital importance. I hope that we all, no, don't put it that way, Claire. May we all develop the eyes and the heart to see clearly, and the courage to speak truth, to speak what we see. May we hold compassion for those who carry distortion, and without accepting the distortion that they carry. May we remember that naming the darkness is not the same thing as becoming the darkness. And trust that the ones in our community who are willing to take fire, because they are often the ones that are standing closest to the truth, I think we need to honor those people. Always be discerning, but recognize and feel when someone is standing in truth, when you are standing in truth in this house of mirrors that we are currently in. We have the capacity to navigate through these distortions. We just need to trust ourselves more. We're going against a lot of programming, guys. A lot of programming. But we can do it. We can do it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. All right, that's all I wanted to share today. Thank you so much again for your presence, and I'll see you next time.